All right, guys, so this week we've progressed from the passing scenarios and focus on the mount. There's two things that we're going to primarily work. One being the Americana. It's probably the most common thing for you guys to get into, especially as beginners. And then off of our partner's reaction to the Americana, we have the ability to go into a gift wrap and then share sit to take it back. Okay, so feel free to move around, guys. When you guys are taking your mount, just some like quality of life things that I want to kind of explain to you guys. If I'm taking a mount where I'm crossing my feet, I'm trying to entangle legs with grapevines, things like that, my hips will be down, okay? But initially when I enter into the position, my partner is likely to be kind of erratic for a brief moment in time and really try to make himself unstable. If my hips are dropped onto him, every time he moves, I'm getting launched off. I'm having to place my two hands in the mat and I'm having to try to like course correct for every big dynamic movement that he makes. So instead, when I initially enter into the mount, instead of dropping my weight here and trying to play high, what I'm gonna do is pinch my knees and then turn my toes inward and hide my feet. Okay, by doing these two things, I make it harder for him to push my foot out and trap my foot. I also make it harder for him to do something like bridge. Go ahead and bridge for me. If he bridges, it takes a little bit of time for him to get to a point where he's actually connecting to me and then driving me, so it dissipates a lot of the motion. I don't get knocked over really hard. It's a little impact. I can deal with it. I can come down and I can react accordingly. Okay, so from here, the next thing that we're going to look at is what is the relationship between his elbows and his upper body. If his arms are coming high, I can go into something like a high mount. If his elbows are driving down and he's starting to cross frame, that's a little bit more problematic. I need to try to address that. I probably need to come down and connect to his head. But initially, we get a lot of guys as beginners who come up and they just bring their hands, whether they bring one to either side or they start to cross the arms. The hands come up by the neck and the head to try to protect those assets, okay? So when he's here in a situation like this, this is gonna present me an opportunity to grab cross grips. So if I grab with my thumbs down, my elbows inherently flare. If I try to stay connected and he pushes out to his side, my base is narrow, I end up getting collapsed past the point where I can catch myself. However, if I grab cross grips, he can go towards either side. If I'm leaning in towards him, it's very easy to support this joint structure where my wrist, my elbow, my shoulder all come in the same alignment, and then I can always release from the opposite side as my active post to then drive weight back into my lower body. Okay, from this position here, if you notice, I have a C-clamp. My other hand is gonna come and do roughly the same thing in the opposite direction. So I'm reinforcing the staple and then I transition my hand. If he doesn't make a consecutive motion to bump, all I'm gonna do is go ahead and drop my elbow to his ear, so directly over the shoulder, and I'm gonna use my tricep to force his head away to some extent. Not very much, but I do what I can. From here, my second hand wants to come under, palm down. If I go the face of my knuckles down, my elbow ends up being really narrow. Same issue, it's hard for me to post on an angle. If I come here with my hand wide, if I haven't gone under his arm yet, when he bumps, I can post out. But if I do get caught, I can always flare my elbow out wide, and I still have the point of base to immediately come back and lock my grip. The other thing that's important here is if I'm playing with my fingertips not connected towards the mat, not rolling my wrist, my partner can easily extend his arm out. It rolls, I lose the connection. However, if I get to this position right here and I rev my knuckles towards the mat, my intention is to turn the ridge of the pinky down, and this puts a lot of tension in the arm. Then I do the same thing here. Already that puts a lot of pressure onto the shoulder. If I then bring my elbow back to the ribs, sometimes I start to get the guy to tap just from that motion. So again, once I connect my two hands, knuckles rev, elbow comes back to the ribs, and then very slowly I would go to lift. Generally, I get the tap before I apply much pressure to come and bring him up, okay? So again, what I would like to see from you guys is pinch, hide the feet, cross grips where we're thumb up, elbows are tight, and we're leaning in towards him. We're making him feel like he needs to make a motion to bump. When he bumps, it doesn't matter which direction he goes, the opposite hand comes off. The same side hand that he turns towards, the arm that's controlling that one is gonna go into a straight alignment where all the joint structures are supported, so wrist, elbow, shoulder, and then I come and I replace the staple. I come down with my elbow to the ear. From here, I'm fighting palm down to make the connection. I'm revving my two hands, pulling the elbow back to the ribs, and then slowly I'm lifting to get the finish. Okay, does it make sense for everybody? Pretty simple. Let's go hands up on two. The process that we're gonna work is gonna be the back take. And when you guys are doing the back take, again, there's some mechanics that I really want you guys to understand. But generally, if I'm attacking the Americana and I'm putting significant pressure leaning over the guy, they're gonna fight to bring their two hands together, okay? So we're looking for that very particular reaction. When you guys are fighting, one thing that maybe I didn't describe as well as I ought to have is when you're in this position here and you're fighting for these cross grips, my elbow shouldn't come away from my side. And how I lean is important to bait that reaction of him feeling like he needs to bridge. So when I make the connection, guys, my elbows stay tight towards my ribs. I lean, so I drive my head over his head and I put pressure into my hands. That's gonna make him wanna pick a side and go ahead and bump, okay? So when he chooses a side to go ahead and bump to, everything would be the same. Sometimes he immediately makes this motion right here. Sometimes it's not until I come down, I've already made the switch here, and I commit the second hand to controlling, then he realizes he's in danger, he bumps the second time, he brings his hand through, okay? In either situation, if you notice here, the arm that's on the opposite, or excuse me, the leg that's on the side here that he elects to face towards, I'm keeping that foot flat to the mat. I'm keeping that leg very tight up under his leg. I don't want him to get that leg extended flat to the mat. That's gonna allow him to start to fight for quarter guard, okay? So when I'm here in this position, a lot of times you'll find that you go to this staple, you don't actually bring your elbow down to the mat, and then we work to bring our chest to the outside, backside rather, of his elbow, his tricep, and his shoulder. Sometimes I have to use my hand to physically manipulate this, but the vast majority of the time, I raise my posture, I rotate my head, shoulders, chest to the opposite side, and then I drive across like so. Sometimes I'll use my hand on the mat, but generally, I'm just driving with my chest. Anytime I get to this position and I have access to both of his arms, I'm always gonna prioritize controlling the top wrist. I don't like to grab a C-clamp, I like to grab a monkey grip, so 4 fingers and thumb. Sometimes we'll call this a false grip if we're going wrist deep, but I make this connection and then I immediately begin to pull. So if you notice, starting out, my forearm may be on top of his wrist here, or his elbow, his forearm. I'm gonna pull, and then immediately I'm gonna go underneath, and I'm gonna begin to use this to weave and to pry. Okay, this is how I create separation between his two arms. At the same time here, I really wanna try to make him face belly down. I'm not gonna step up with my left leg first, like a traditional S mount. Instead, what I'm gonna do is apply the tension here, make sure I'm underneath, and I'm gonna step up on the backside. When I do this, a lot of you guys are gonna have the tendency to wanna go flat-footed. Please avoid this. Go to the ball of your foot. So when I step up, by coming to the ball of my foot, what I have the ability to do is stay low, and now I can take a motion like a shot, where I drive from the ball of my foot to my knee comes high here, above the shoulder, I'm establishing this knee-elbow connection. At the same time, my left leg pulls, but it stays incredibly tight. And if my knee comes up, this is more space for him to try to frame, to use his elbows, so I'm always fighting to keep my knee supporting my tricep, keeping my knee tight to his upper body, his torso. I use my toes in the mat here on the backside like a kickstand. So anytime I need to get low and drive pressure to make him face belly down, I do that by having my toes engaged to the mat. Once I have strong control here and I feel like my chest has driven his shoulder to the mat, then I begin to release from the bottom hand, weave through, and connect to my gift wrap. Okay, off of my gift wrap, once I have everything solidified, this is where I'll begin to drop my foot, tuck my foot parallel with my partner's back, and then I sit to my right hip. From my right hip, I need to hoist him up into my lap, and then never putting my lower back on the mat and keeping my head tight. I rock from my left hip, from my right hip across to my left hip, and I engage my left foot in dorsiflex above the hip. This will allow me to either pressure pushing on his body or reinforce my leg, foot to heel, and I can always take him and start to tilt him off of the mat. Okay, we're not gonna talk about any kind of finishing sequence from there today. I just want you guys to be able to create that off angle and make it hard for him to try to put your foot back in any type of guard position, okay? So again, when you guys are working, we're here, we're leaning, he goes to make his bump, I reinforce, I use chest pressure to connect to the top wrist, I pull, I get inside position. When I feel I'm in a good spot, I begin to step up, taking this mechanic, this motion like a shot. I try to keep everything tight. I come to this reinforcement of my gift wrap. I continue to drive him, my chest to his back. I engage my foot as I need to avoid him rolling into me. And then when I'm ready, when I feel everything is secure, my head will stay tight. My foot will come here parallel with the back. I'll rotate to my hip while pulling him into my lap. I lean from one side to the other, never allowing my lower back to go to the mat, and fighting to keep good head position under his, where he doesn't have the ability to head pummel and get his head and shoulders to the mat. The last thing I want to talk about here, most of you guys have already seen it, is how do we maintain the mount when my partner's doing a really good job of framing me at a distance. So the best way that I can explain this is if my legs, particularly my knees, my shins, stay parallel with his upper body, his torso, and he can create, for example, a frame on the underside of my armpit. Can you do it with the opposite hand? If he can get me going on an angle here and I can't adjust my legs, past a certain point here when my outside leg gets elevated, one, he has an opportunity to do what he just did, but let's say that he keeps framing. Here, I don't have the ability because so much weight comes onto my right hand to adjust my hand out any wider. So when my left leg gets elevated like this, I have a tendency to drop my elbow. As soon as I do that, I can see top position to him. Okay, so if I don't make an adjustment at the beginning when my partner starts to frame me away and create distance, it's very easy for me to get stuck and give up the reversal to him. So when we fight, in a motion, specifically where he bridges is when this works best. If I was controlling the same grips and I did the same movement, if he just goes to shrimp right now, I won't have any clearance, so I have to try to move my hand kind of preemptively and drive my knee back. But what can work really, really well is when he takes a really predominant bridge here, my right leg curls, and then as he goes to twist, because this is already under, turn towards me, my left knee can come towards my right foot. This gives me counterbalance. I have enough of my weight back over the top of his torso that my hand is more or less void of weight. I can adjust my post and I can drive back. Typically with this, I end up having to come back into some type of cross face and then trying to straighten my leg back out. But I use that as a reset to avoid getting, not swept, but reversed. So again, when you guys are here, if you know your partner's making big movements to bridge, we just go ahead and rotate underneath and then we drive back. A lot of times in this scenario, we're looking to pass off to a cross face versus just trying to isolate the arm. But that motion right there that I want you guys to take away is not allowing your legs to stay here and get distanced. Instead, when you get bumped, curling and using that back leg as counterbalance to adjust your hands and walk back.